6. Through this natural selection of the fittest, species become represented by individuals which are better and better adapted. 5. Post-Darwinian period. The history of evolutionary thought subsequent to the publication of the book, The Origin of Species, may be divided into the following three periods. The Romantic period. The Romantic period extended from 1860 to about 1903 and was characterized by extreme enthusiasm for Darwinism, together with an uncritical acceptance of whatever data were claimed to support Darwinism. Negative evidence was given little weight, while illogical extremes of interpretation in order to make observed facts fit Darwinian theory were quite common. Leaders of this group in England included T. H. Huxley (1825–1895), Herbert Spencer (1820–1903), and George Romanes, while in the United States David Starr Jordan and Asa Gray (1810–1888) were the leaders. As a group, they went to interpretive extremes, reading adaptive significance into every organic structure, even on the most imaginary evidence. They often cited excellent anatomical and taxonomic evidence, but experiments to test adaptive values were unusual. It should not be thought that these were second-rate biologists who were blinded by the brilliance of a great man like Darwin. On the contrary, they were excellent men in their respective fields. Huxley made splendid contributions to the development of invertebrate zoology, taxonomy and vertebrate anatomy. Spencer was one of the leading philosophers of his time. Romanes started his career as an invertebrate neurologist, but he soon became mainly engrossed in evolutionary problems. Jordan was one of the best ichthyologists of all times. Gray was a botanist of great repute. Nor should it be thought that they never ventured to differ from Darwin, for these men were independent thinkers. Yet the atmosphere of approval was extraordinary. Thomas H. Huxley (1825–1895), nicknamed Darwin's Bulldog, was a young energetic English scientist who took up the cause of evolution in many public debates. He fought on behalf of Darwin, who preferred to keep out of the public eye. However, Huxley was inspired by Haeckel, and he distorted Darwin's ideas with no tions of progress. Nary. It has been said that evolution was born in England, but found its home in Germany. In fact, the German evolutionists of the Romantic period were more strictly Darwinian than their English and American colleagues in the sense that they were generally more thorough and careful collector of data. The leaders in Germany were von Baer, Karl Gegenbauer, Ernst Haeckel and August Weismann. Von Baer (1792–1876) was a great embryologist, and he tried to deduct some evolutionary meaning from embryology of different animals. His basic principles of embryology states that 1. General characters appear before special characters. 2. From the more general characters, less general and finally the special characters develop. 3. An animal during development departs progressively from the forms of other animals. 4. The young stages of animals are like the young, or embryonic, stages of other animals lower in the scale, but not like the adults of those animals. Gegenbauer (1826–1903) was one of the greatest and most influential comparative anatomists. He and his collaborators made exhaustive studies, in complete detail, upon all classes of vertebrates, and used the data so obtained in support of Darwinian theory. Much of the phylogeny, i.e., the evolutionary or ancestral history of organisms, of the Est Haeckel (1834–1919) developed the idea of evolution of progress to its fullest extent. He believed that nature had been deliberately moving towards find goal, human beings. Vertebrates in current textbooks of zoology is taken from the works of Gegenbauer and his collaborators. Ernst Haeckel (1834–1919) did significant work in anatomy, embryology and taxonomy. His studies in comparative embryology led him to broaden the principles of von Baer into the theory of recapitulation or biogenetic law, in support of which he published extensively. In one of his writings, Generelle Morphologie, Haeckel 1866 defined the biogenetic law in the following way. An individual organism in its development ontogeny tends to recapitulate or repeat the stages passed through by its ancestor phylogeny, or that ontogeny repeats phylogeny. August Weismann (1834–1914) was a classical geneticist. For explaining the mode of inheritance in living organisms, he rejected outrightly the Lamarckian ideology of inheritance of acquired characters and Darwin's pangenesis hypothesis by demonstrating a well-known experiment in which he cut the tails of mice for 22 generations, yet each new lot of offspring consisted only of animals with tails. He forwarded an entirely speculative and theoretical hypothesis of the continuity of germplasm, or as most popularly known, germplasm theory. The main drawbacks of Weismann were that he was unaware of work of his contemporary geneticist Mendel, and his speculations rested on some data on chromosome behavior during mitosis which were often reported to him by his graduate students as he gradually became blind before he completed his major works. He correctly predicted the occurrence of reduction division, or meiosis, and the chemical nature of the hereditary units, see Dodson and Dodson, 1976. Weismann imagined that natural selection had operated at three levels: between individuals, Darwin and Wallace; between parts, organs, tissues, etc., of the same individual, Roux. According to Roux, 1881, the struggle is waged among the molecules, tissues and organs. What is at stake is the intake of food which, according to its quality, ensures greater or lesser growth, and consequently differentiation. See Grass, 1977, and between germinal determinants, now called genes, Weismann. Thus, according to Weismann, the most important struggle is between the vital, invisible particles, genes, whether they reside in the body cell, soma, or the sex cells. These determinants are never identical with one another, and their ability to assimilate food varies from one another. The strongest take the most food, and their descendants prevail over the others. The result is that by the second generation the parts of the organism represented in the ovum by the strongest determinants are the most highly developed. This explains the dominance of certain characteristics. The determinants of organs favored by natural selection are better fed than the rest and are the winners in the competition. Hence, the strengthening of change in that direction. See Grass, 1977. Also prominent during the Romantic period was Karl Pearson and Francis Galton, who laid the foundation of the new sciences of statistics and biometry, which play a prominent role in modern evolutionary studies. The agnostic period. The agnostic period extended from 1903 to 1935 and involved a lot of skepticism and disillusionment. Many factors converged to cause this change. One factor was the rediscovery of Mendel's laws of heredity in 1900. Today Mendelism is the foundation of most studies in evolution, but then the permanence of the gene seemed to raise fearful obstacles to the origin of new species. In consequence, genetics was regarded as a sort of blind path at the end of which stood the sign, the gene, the dead end. Another factor was the conclusion which was drawn by Johansen from his hereditary experiment of the size in beans, that selection could be effective only in a stock, or organism, with hereditary variability. Variations produced by the environment, including nutrition, sunlight, temperature and moisture, were unimportant for evolution. Finally, besides natural selection, many additional mechanisms and causes were sought by different evolutionists for explaining the evolution. For instance, Moritz Wagner, 1868, emphasized the effects of different environments on isolated forms. Gulick pointed out the unavoidability of divergence even without difference in environment. Carl Nageli suggested that an inner directive guides the course of evolution mainly independent of the environment. Hugo de Vries, 1848-1935, in his book The Mutation Theory, 1909, distinguished between continuous individual variation and discrete. That an inner directive guides the course of evolution mainly independent of the environment. Hugo de Vries, 1848-1935, in his book The Mutation Theory, 1909, distinguished between continuous individual variation and discrete, saltational variations. He applied the term mutation to the latter only. De Vries experimented with the plant evening primrose Oenothera lamarckiana. For de Vries it was these mutations that controlled evolutionary change and which were more important than natural selection itself. The early Mendelians, such as de Vries, therefore, played down the ability of natural selection and emphasized the overriding importance of Mendelian ratios and mutations in molding evolution. Some evolutionists Hugo de Vries recognized the importance and challenge of Mendelism and set out to 1848-1935 reconcile it with the Darwinian theory. Because the results of their efforts went beyond the mechanism that Darwin had proposed, the synthesis that emerged is often referred to as Neo-Darwinism. See Callow, 1983. Further, interest of some neo-Darwinists shifted from considering the consequences of breeding from pairs of individuals to the consequences of breeding between individuals in populations. The Mendelian ratio then became frequencies of occurrence of genotypes in populations, and genetic and evolutionary changes were defined in the terms of changes in these frequencies. In 1908, G. H. Hardy and W. Weinberg independently concluded that Mendelian mechanisms themselves do not cause changes in gene frequencies and they cannot be an important element in directing evolutionary change. Moreover, two books, J.B.S. Haldane's Genetical Theory of Evolution, 1930, and R. F. Fisher's The Cause of Evolution, 1932, were greatly important in shaping the subsequent development of Neo-Darwinism. Both Fisher and Haldane expressed the intensity of selection in terms of changes in gene frequencies. Those alleles that increase in frequency relative to others are said to be fitter, so the change in these relative frequencies measures Neo-Darwinian fitness. Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection, i.e., the rate of increase of fitness of any organism at any time is equal to its genetic variance in fitness at that time. Sewell Wright, another pioneer of Neo-Darwinism, in 1931 developed a conceptual framework for considering the interaction between genes and their influence on fitness. This is referred to as an adaptive landscape or fitness space. Wright's emphasis was on populations of genes. However, R. B. Goldschmidt, 1878-1958, who had wide experience in the study of geographic variations, taxonomy and physiological genetics, is the principal proponent of the main alternative to the dominant Neo-Darwinian theory. Punctuated equilibrium concept of evolution. This idea was proposed in 1972 by two American paleontologists, Dr. S. J. Gould and Dr. N. Eldridge, and has been widely accepted as the best way to interpret evolutionary patterns over geological time. See Henry G., 1993. This concept contradicted Darwin's idea that species evolve gradually one into other by insensible degree. According to Gould and Eldridge, species evolve by sudden bursts of rapid change that punctuate long periods of static equilibrium. The punctuated equilibrium concept showed that Darwinian gradualism should have been supported by fossil record, i.e., transitional forms should make up the bulk of fossils. But fossil record shows that species seem to persist with little change over many millions of years. Thus, there is no use to try to find evidence of gradual change in fossil record, because it is not there to begin with. C.G., 1993. According to Gould and Eldridge, species evolve very rapidly, within a few thousand years, too short a time for preservation of the fossil record to be likely. But once evolved species remain unchanged for many times, longer than it makes them to evolve. Thus, stasis, stoppage, of species becomes data of evolution. Stephen Jay Gould, B. 1942, is among the scientists who are continually testing and questioning the details of evolution theory. To support their idea, Gould and Eldridge took help of the idea of mutation. Thus, according to the process of speciation change, in the form of the successive mutations, it tends to happen most efficiently in small peripheral populations of a species rather than in the general mass in which such mutations might be swamped. Likewise, individuals from small populations in transition have even less chance of fossilization than those from large ones. Of course, natural selection can be a force for change in small as well as large populations, but a chance and accident assume more significance in smaller populations. But fossil record Sewell Wright, another pioneer of neo-Darwinism. This is referred to as an adaptive landscape or fitness space. Wright's emphasis was on populations of genes. However, R.B. Goldschmidt, 1878-1958, who had wide experience in the study of geographic variations, taxonomy and physiological genetics, is the principal proponent of the main alternative to the dominant neo-Darwinian theory. Punctuated equilibrium concept of evolution. This idea was proposed in 1972 by two American paleontologists, Dr. S. J. Gould and Dr. N. Eldridge, and has been widely accepted as the best way to interpret evolutionary patterns over geological time. See Henry G., 1993. This concept contradicted Darwin's idea that species evolve gradually one into other by insensible degree. According to Gould and Eldridge, species evolve by sudden bursts of rapid change that punctuate long periods of static equilibrium. The punctuated equilibrium concept showed that Darwinian gradualism should have been supported by fossil record, i.e., transitional forms should make up the bulk of fossils. But fossil record shows that species seem to persist with little change over many millions of years. Thus, there is no use to try to find evidence of gradual change in fossil record, because it is not there to begin with. C.G., 1993. According to Gould and Eldridge, species evolve very rapidly, within a few thousand years. The punctuated equilibrium concept showed that Darwinian gradualism should have been supported by fossil record, i.e., transitional forms should make up the bulk of fossils. But fossil record shows that species seem to persist with little change over many millions of years. Thus, there is no use to try to find evidence of gradual change in fossil record, because it is not there to begin with. C.G., 1993. According to Gould and Eldridge, species evolve very rapidly, within a few thousand years, too short a time for preservation of the fossil record to be likely. But once evolved species remain unchanged for many times, longer than it makes them to evolve. Thus, stasis, stoppage, of species becomes data of evolution. Stephen Jay Gould, B. 1942, is among the scientists who are continually testing and questioning the details of evolution theory. To support their idea, Gould and Eldridge took help of the idea of mutation. Thus, according to the process of speciation change, in the form of the successive mutations, it tends to happen most efficiently in small peripheral populations of a species rather than in the general mass in which such mutations might be swamped. Likewise, individuals from small populations in transition have even less chance of fossilization than those from large ones. Of course, natural selection can be a force for change in small as well as large populations, but a chance and accident assume more significance in smaller populations. Once formed, the new species expand into new habitats and settles down to comfortable status. The result is not one but two populations, exactly the pattern observed in the fossil record in many cases. The modern synthesis period. The synthesis of a coherent theory of evolution which takes into account all the pertinent facts of modern biology has been the work of several biologists during the past 50 years. The first edition of Theodosius Dobzhansky's now classic book, Genetics and the Origin of Species, which appeared in 1937, set the stage, and stimulated biologists in several fields to contribute to the synthetic evolutionary theory. The term modern synthesis was first used by Julian Huxley in 1942. As presented in the famous book, Evolution, The Modern Synthesis by Huxley, 1942, the modern synthesis or synthetic theory was an amalgamation of the data and concepts of genetics, taxonomy, embryology, biogeography, and other disciplines. Stanley, 1979. Likewise, books by zoologist Ernst Mayr, 1942, 1963, showed how the modern theory could explain the origin of variation patterns in higher animals, and G. L. Stebbins, 1950, attempted to do the same for higher plants. E. B. Babcock's 1947 study of the genus Crepus, carried over a period of more than 30 years, is one of the most thorough and comprehensive studies ever made upon a single genus of plants, and it is one of the major supports of the neo-Darwinian theory. Clausen and coworkers in 1951 have published extensive studies on the behavior of plants when grown in widely different habitats. A leading paleontologist G. G. Simpson showed in his Theodosius Dobzhansky, 1900-1975, worked with T. H. Morgan on fruit flies and helped in the synthesis of genetics and evolutionary theory. He coined the term, isolating mechanisms, for the biological barriers that discourage crossing between different species. 2 books, Tempo and Mode in Evolution, 1944, and The Major Features of Evolution, 1953, that the fossil record of higher animals is best explained by assuming that throughout the evolutionary history of living things those same processes took place which were being experimentally demonstrated by many workers in populations of contemporary animals. In 1960, Bernhard Rensch has made a strong case for the belief that the evolution of genera, families and higher categories of animals has taken place through an extension into long periods of time of those same processes which at any one time level govern the origin of races and species. According to Mayr, 1970, most of the earlier evolutionary theories were characterized by heavy emphasis on a single factor, as has been tabulated below in Table 2:1. 1 Yen, 10-275b Theories of Evolutionary Changes, E. Meyer, 1970. A. Monistic, single-factor explanations. 1. Ectogenetic, change directly induced by the environment. A. Random response, for example, radiation effects. B. Adaptive response, Geoffroyism. 2. Endogenetic, changes controlled by intrinsic forces. A. Finalistic, orthogenetic. B. Volitional, genuine Lamarckism. C. Mutational limitations. D. Epigenetic limitations. 3. Random events, accidents. A. Spontaneous mutations. B. Recombination. 4. Natural selection. B. Synthetic, multiple factor explanations. 1b plus 2a plus 2b equals most. Lamarckian type. Theories 1b plus 2b plus 2c plus 4 equals some recent. Lamarckian. Theories 1b plus 3 plus 4 equals late Darwinian. Most non-mutationists during first 3 decades of 20th century. 3 plus 4 equals early. Modern synthesis. La plus 2c plus 2d plus 3 plus 4 equals recent. Modern synthesis. The modern synthetic theory selected the best aspects of the earlier hypotheses and combined them in a new and original manner. In essence, a two-factor theory, it regards the diversity and harmonious adaptation of the organic world as the result of a steady production of variation and of the selective effects of the environment. Attempting to explain evolution by a single-factor theory was the main weakness of the pre-Darwinian and most 19th-century evolutionary theories. For instance, Lamarckism with its internal self-improvement principle, Geoffroyism with its induction of genetic change by the environment, Cuvier's catastrophism, Wagner's isolation, de Vries' mutationism, all tried to explain evolution by a single principle, excluding all others. Even Charles Darwin occasionally fell into this error, yet on the whole he was the first to make a serious effort to present evolutionary events as due to a balance of conflicting forces. The current theory of evolution, the modern synthesis, owes more to Darwin than to any other evolutionist and is built around Darwin's essential concepts. Yet it incorporates much that is distinctly post-Darwinian. The concepts of mutation, variation, population, inheritance, isolation, and species, all of which were quite nebulous in Darwin's days, but now are much better defined and understood, have been incorporated in recent, modern synthesis. C. Meyer. 1970. PresentState of evolution idea. The current synthetic theory of evolution recognizes 5 basic types of processes: gene mutation, changes in chromosome number and structure, genetic recombination, natural selection, and reproductive isolation. The first 3 provide the genetic variability without which change cannot take place. Natural selection and reproductive isolation guide populations of organisms into adaptive channels. Migration of individuals from one population to another, as well as hybridization between races or closely related species, both increase the amount of genetic variability available to a population. The effects of chance, acting on small populations, may alter the way in which natural selection guides the course of evolution. Direct evidences of evolution, fossils. Darwinian evolution permits 2 general predictions. 1. If there were an evolution from simple forms to more complex ones, there must be certain structural, developmental and chemical similarities between different forms of life, and 2. There must be a means by which variation in populations arise, and are transmitted from generation to generation. Chapters 3 and 4 will deal with the evidences that have been found to support the idea of a relationship between existing organisms and also of a relationship between extinct and existing organisms, while certain forthcoming chapters will deal with the way in which change can initiate and bring about an evolutionary process such as that proposed by Darwin. The evidence that organic evolution has occurred is so overwhelming that no one who is acquainted with it has any doubt that new species are derived from previously existing one by descent with modification. The fossil record paleontology provides direct evidence of organic evolution and gives the details of the evolutionary relationships of many lines of descent, while different biological disciplines such as comparative anatomy, taxonomy, embryology, physiology, biochemistry, genetics and biogeography provide indirect evidence in support of biological evolution. At B. Copyright. Fossils of extinct organisms, A. trilobites, B. seed ferns and C. dinosaurs provide strong support that today's organisms were not created Alatans butaros over time by the process of evolution. The direct evidences for biological evolution can be discussed as follows. Pataeontological evidences. Most convincing evidence that evolution has occurred comes from the fossil record of ancient creatures. The study of ancient life is called paleontology, gr. Paleos equals ancient plus onto equals existing things plus logos equals discourse. The science of paleontology links biology with geology and is concerned with the finding, cataloging and interpreting of fossils. Even before the Renaissance, men had discovered shells, teeth, bones, and other parts of animals buried in the ground, i.e., fossils. Some of these fossils corresponded to the parts of familiar living animals, but others were strangely unlike any known form. Many of the objects fossils found in rocks high in the mountains, far from the sea, resembled parts of marine animals. In the 15th century, the versatile artist and scientist, Leonardo da Vinci (1452–1519) gave the correct explanation of these curious finds, and gradually his conclusion that they were the remains of animals that had existed at one time but had become extinct, was accepted. This evidence of former life led to the formulation of the theory of catastrophism by the founder of Georges Cuvier, paleontology and a versatile French naturalist. Georges Cuvier, 1769–1832. 1769–1832. The theory of catastrophism holds that a succession of catastrophes, fires and floods, have periodically destroyed all living things, followed each time by the origin of new and higher types by the acts of special creation. Cuvier was also responsible for developing the law of correlation, which states that certain structures are invariably found together. Cuvier is referred to as founder or father of modern paleontology. The concept of catastrophism was replaced by the theory of uniformitarianism due to the landmark investigations of three geologists, namely James Hutton, John Playfair and Sir Charles Lyell in the 18th and early 19th centuries. James Hutton, 1785, developed the concept that the geologic forces at work in the past were the same as those operating now. He arrived at this conclusion after a careful study of the erosion of valleys by rivers and the formation of American scientist Lewis sedimentary deposits at the mouth of rivers. He demonstrated that the Agassiz, 1807–1873, a follower, 1 sexes of erosion, sedimentation, disruption and uplift, carried on of Cuvier added a new type of catastrophe, the ice ages. Over long periods of time, could account for the formation of fossil bearing rock strata. The publication of the book, Illustrations of the Huttonian Theory of the Earth, by John Playfair, 1802, gave further explanation and examples of the idea of uniformitarianism in geologic processes. Finally, the publication of C. Lyell's book, Principles of Geology, 1932, had firmly established the concept of uniformitarianism. In India, paleontological work has been started as early as 1851 by the setting up of the Geological Survey of India in that year. The India Museum, started in 1866, helped in collection of fossils and the spreading of paleontological knowledge. Two other institutions which contributed to the progress of Indian paleontology are the Mining and Geological Institute, founded in 1906 at Asansol, and the Institute of Palayabotany, established at Lucknow in 1946 by the initiative of Professor Birbal Sahani. In 1950, Paleontological Society of India was established, and in 1965 Palynological Society of India was laid down. P. N. Bose was the first Indian paleontologist whose paper was published in 1880 on a fossil carnivore from Siwalik Hills. In India, there are many good fossil collection spots both in the Himalayan regions and in the Deccan. In the foothills of Himalayas, the fossils have been collected from places such as Siwalik Hills, Spiti, Punjab and Kumaon. Fossils have also been collected from Sikkim. In the Deccan, there are fossil collection spots at Jabalpur and in many parts of Gujarat. In South India, fossils have been collected at Rajamundry, Trichinopalli and Keelan. Branches of paleontology. Paleontology is subdivided into the following branches. 1. Palyabotany, which deals with the study of plant fossils. It includes palynology, which is the study of fossil spores and pollen grains. 2. Palaeozoology, which deals with the study of animal fossils and includes invertebrate paleontology and vertebrate paleontology. 3. Micropaleontology, which deals with study of small microscopic fossils, microfossils, and their fragments, e.g., foraminifera, fusilionids and ostracodes. 4. Palaeoecology, which is the study of ancient organisms and their environment. Fossil of arrow-headed amphibian fossils of Triassic nautiloids, fossil frog Jurassic. Diplocaulus Permian, ammonite and surviving nautiloid. Fossils fossils, Latin fossilis or foder equals to dig, are the remains or impressions of organisms preserved from the geologic past. They are virtually anything that is formed by or derived from a prehistoric organism. This includes bones, wood, shells, teeth, skin, pollen, tracks, burrows, and even feces or dung. The fossil record provides us with evidence that there were organisms that have become extinct. A sonarchaeologist reconstructs, from imperfect relics occasionally preserved, something of the nature and customs of ancient people, so the paleontologist obtains from the fossils and the sediments containing them, dim views of far earlier scenes in the life of animals and plants. These he fits together into a steadily growing history, but the record as a whole will always lie beyond his reach. How fossils are formed. The animals or plants are only preserved and fossilized when they are suddenly buried in the silt of water, lava, ice or sand. As soon as the animal, plant or any other organism dies, its body decomposes sooner or later. Decomposition is caused by several agents. Scavengers of all sorts from vultures to bacteria and fungi take care of the soft parts very rapidly. Harder tissues such as shell, bones and wood are more resistant. Nevertheless, enzymes secreted by certain fungi and bacteria, acids occurring naturally in the soil, and the combined action of environmental agents such as water, wind, and temperature destroys even the hardest organic remains with time. However, under very special circumstances some parts may be preserved, with varying amounts of modifications, to form fossils. Figure 3.1. Thus, shells which are inorganic in nature are usually preserved completely unaltered. Bones and wood, on the other hand, are often mineralized or petrified, i.e., turned to stone. The organic matter in wood or bone gradually disintegrates, leaving the structure somewhat porous. Water seeps into the A. In lowlands, animal drinking at water hole accidentally falls and drowns. Skeleton is buried in mud which eventually becomes sandstone centuries later. Erosion cuts through the sandstone and sea uncovers fossil. Figure 3.1. Schematic representation of the process of fossilization, after Solbrig, 1966. Interior of the bone and minerals dissolved in the water are slowly deposited there. Thus, the porosities gradually become filled with deposits of such materials as lime or silica. The portions of the original structure composed of inorganic materials may remain substantially as they were in life, or they also may be dissolved away and replaced by minerals. The replacing material may preserve the details of the original structure with great fidelity, or on the other hand, it may preserve only the general form of the original. Yet fossil may contain some of the original material found in the living organism. For example, amino acids have been found in fossils of millions of years old. Conditions of fossilization. Fossilization is the sum of the phenomena by which the remains of animals or plants are preserved. The process of fossilization requires the occurrence of the following fundamental conditions. 1. Possession of hard parts. Organisms having hard parts are much more likely to become fossilized than are those lacking a skeleton. These hard body parts include bones, teeth, shell, chitin or woody tissues of plants. 2. Escape from immediate destruction. The possibility that any given animal will leave a fossil record is very small. Since the remains of most of these organisms are destroyed by the work of the atmosphere, mechanical forces such as wave action or crushing and biological agents such as predators, scavengers and decomposers, bacteria and fungi. 3. Immediate burial in a medium capable of retarding decomposition. The animals or plants are only preserved and fossilized when they are suddenly buried in the lava and volcanic ash or dust of freshly erupted volcano, in the ice, in an oil-rich soil, in transparent resins of certain ancient pine-like plants, e.g., amber, in swamps, in desiccated deserts under huge piles of sand at high temperature or under water in layers of silt piling one above the other, in seas and oceans, especially in the fossil dragonfly, which is about 170 million years shallower regions and at the river deltas. Old closely resembles its modern counterpart B. For example, organisms in the sea are more likely to fossilize than those on land, for it is in the marine habitat that sediments build most rapidly. Recent evidence further suggested that the rate of decay on the ocean bottom, where temperature is low and pressures are great, is reduced. 4. Subsequent vicissitudes, changes. After burial the fossil may be very much altered. The commonest type of alteration is flattening of the fossil due to pressure as more and more layers of sediment are piled on top of the bed containing the fossil. The bed may be further altered by folding and lateral movements. Eventually, it has to be uncovered by erosion if we are to get possession of the fossil, and it might be further damaged in this process. Some fossils have been exposed in the past and reburied. Formation of rocks. Geologists envision the Earth's crust as having gone through a series of changes involving the alterations of land masses by glacier movements or land shifts that resulted in the rise of mountain ranges, and the leveling of other land when one land mass came to rest upon another. The tremendous pressures exerted, and the lack of available water, caused the conversion of the original land mass into rock strata. Through the geological ages, then, landmass overland mass formed layers of rock strata, each of which had, at some time, been exposed to the atmospheric environment. The lowest strata solidified some 2 to 3 billion years ago. The rock strata of Earth includes sedimentary and igneous rocks, the formation of both of which remains significant in the process of fossilization. To understand the nature of the formation of sedimentary rocks, one must take into account certain natural processes that are occurring in the world today and that have been occurring since the crust of the Earth was formed. By the process of erosion, through the action of wind and rain, and of freezing and thawing, rocks are gradually broken into the small particles that form soil. Through the action of rain, the particles of the soil are carried into streams and rivers and ultimately into lakes or oceans. This sedimentary material carries with it the bodies of many aquatic organisms and also the bodies of terrestrial forms that happen to be swept along by the streams and rivers. The hard parts of some of these organisms may be preserved, and in the course of time the sedimentary deposit, owing to the pressure of water above it and also to chemical reactions, is converted into sedimentary rock. The nature of the sedimentary material determines the kind of sedimentary rock formed. Limestone, sandstone, and shale are familiar kinds. The method of formation of sedimentary rocks clearly distinguishes them from igneous rocks, which were formed by the solidification of molten material when the Earth cooled, and are being formed by cooling of magma expelled from active volcanoes. Other natural processes called submergence and emergence have occurred in the past and are still occurring between land and sea. Slow equals and gradual changes in level between land and sea are now in process. For instance, it is now recognized that the land on the eastern coast of United States is gradually sinking into the sea, whereas the land on the Pacific coast is gradually rising. The sinking of the land below the sea is called submergence, and the rising of land above the sea is called emergence. In the geologic past, many regions of the Earth have undergone a series of submergences and emergences. As a consequence, in many places, e.g., strata of Grand Canyon of the Colorado, a whole series of different layers of sedimentary rocks is found. The chief fossil-bearing sedimentary rocks. The walls of Grand Canyon have been formed of sandstone, shale, limestone, gypsum, faux sedimentary rocks which cover more than 1 billion. Fate rock, coal, iron formation, etc. Years of evolutionary history. Further, the law of superposition of geology states that the deepest layer of Earth's strata was deposited first and other layers in succession at later periods of time. Consequently, more superficially located fossils will be considered to be of recent origin. Moreover, if each formed layer of rock was left undisturbed until another layer was deposited on top of it, one would have perfect series for the study of fossil forms. The rock record of the Earth, however, is not so complete. Layers deposited underwater can emerge as land and be partially or completely eroded away. If a new submergence then occurs and a new layer of sedimentary rock is formed, there will be an unconformity between the two strata. This lack of sequence between layers makes the study and identification of strata difficult. Also, fossils that were formed may be destroyed in the formation of metamorphic rocks. As a result of great pressure and heat, deep layers may melt. When this material later solidifies again, the fossils originally present will usually be lost. Limestone is a form of sedimentary rock rich in fossils. When limestone melts and crystallizes into metamorphic rock, the result is marble. Despite the paucity of fossil formation and destruction of fossils by several reasons, the story of rocks is a very convincing one with reference to evolution. Determination of age of rocks and fossils. In the past, geologists and paleontologists were able to make fairly accurate estimations of the age of different rock strata and their fossil record by using the known rate of the accumulation of salt in the oceans. Presently, rock deposits are dated largely by taking advantage of the fact that certain radioactive elements are transformed into other elements at rates which are slow and essentially unaffected by the pressures and temperature to which the rock has been subjected. For example, geologists standardly use uranium lead dating, devised by Boltwood, 1907, to estimate the time of solidification of rock. Radioactive uranium decays spontaneously to lead. The half-life of uranium is about 4,500,000,000 years. Since the uranium of the Earth was formed 4 to 5 billion years ago when the great pressure of a contracting dust cloud created thermonuclear heat, why should not all uranium measurement give the same age, 4 to 5 billion years? The answer lies in the difference between the radioactive decay in a solid and in a liquid. In a liquid, the uranium is diluted, washed away, etc. But when liquid solidifies, the uranium it contains is not free to move, and undergoes its decay into lead in a highly localized region. The ratio of uranium to its stable product, lead, indicates the time of solidification of the liquid material and, therefore, the time at which it was added to the Earth's crust. According to uranium lead method, the Precambrian rocks are the oldest and date back to about 3,300 million years. Fourth, determination of the age of fossils. Other radioactive materials are analyzed. Radioactive carbon (C) is a natural radioactive form, produced in the atmosphere from the contact of naturally occurring (C) with UV light. It passes down as CO, and enters plants and then animal material. The ratio of C to C remains constant during life, because of the constant interaction of biological organisms with the environment. Upon death and fossilization, this ratio decreases as the (C) undergoes decay. It is possible, therefore, to determine when the fossilized individual lived by comparing its present C to 12C ratio with that usually maintained during life. Radioactive carbon has a half-life of about 5,568 plus 30 years, and can only be measured up to 25,000 years or about 5 half-lives. This limitation results because the amount of syn organisms is so small to begin with. Radioactive carbon dating, it was devised by Libby, 1949, is excellent for the anthropological studies of early tribal civilizations, but not for the earlier strata. Recently, the transformation of radioactive potassium, K to argon and rubidium to strontium has been used in a similar way for dating fossil-bearing rocks of any age and type. K has a half-life of 1.3 billion years. Also because of its greater concentration in most rocks, it is more accurate method of dating fossils than uranium, a relatively rare element. A bed of pre-human fossils in South Africa dated by rock composition gave a result of 500,000 years, whereas radioactive potassium dating method indicated an age of 1,750,000 years, a most important difference, considering the nature of the fossils. Relatively short periods of geologic time are estimated by measuring the rate at which waterfalls recede upstream as they wear away the rocks over which they tumble or by counting the annual deposits of clay on the bottom of ponds and lakes. Nature of fossils. A fossil is a record of an organism that lived in the past, whose remains have come into comparative equilibrium with the sediments in which it was buried. Fossils are formed in a variety of ways, depending upon the organic material involved and environmental conditions. They fall into the following two broad classes. 1. Unaltered fossils. Some specimens are preserved relatively unchanged from their original condition. Teeth, bones and shells occasionally are found virtually intact buried in sediments. Even more dramatically, remains of organisms have been frozen in Arctic ice fields. Mammoths, an extinct form related to elephant, have been found in their hairy entirety throughout Siberia and have served as an extensive source of fossil ivory. Their flesh was so well preserved that it was eaten by dogs. Creatures, e.g., largest mammals such as elephants, mastodons and paramylodons, have been trapped in asphalt or tar pits at Rancho La Barra in Los Angeles, California. Likewise, in Poland 2 skeletons of the woolly rhinoceros, with some of the flesh and skin preserved, have been found buried in oil-soaked ground. The remains of great iris deer are found in peat bogs of Ireland. In the same way, the human Bodis, their clothing and food, who lived in the plateau of Arizona, USA, and New Mexico, have been preserved in the dry air and remained as such for hundreds of years. Many preserved mammoth from Siberia. Tertiary insects have been preserved in the amber, fossil resin, exuded from the pine-like trees in Germany. 2. Altered fossils. The organisms become more or less completely changed by the infiltration of minerals from surrounding rocks, e.g., bones and wood. For such fossils the term petrifaction is applied, i.e., turn to stone. The petrified forests of Yellowstone National Park and the Arizona Painted Desert of the USA are well-known examples of petrifaction. In Yellowstone, volcanic ash covered the forest about 40 to 60 million years ago. This was followed by partial mineralization of the plant tissues by silica and quartz which came from the volcanic debris and was circulated through the plants by groundwater. Millions of years later the forest was exposed when the surrounding volcanic matter was eroded away. In some regions, as many as 27 layers of petrified forests have been discovered. Fossil parks. India hosts rich deposits of fossil plants spanning a gap of 3,500 million years. Birbal Sahani Institute of Paleobotany, Lucknow, has discovered and studied 20 million years old fossil forests. These forests require to be systematically studied and conserved for scientific understanding. Paleontologists have recognized the following localities which can be raised to the status of national fossil parks. 1. 50 million years old fossil forests preserved in the intertrapine sediments between the streaming lava flows that poured out into the Deccan region and Mandala district, Madhya Pradesh. 2. 100 million years old fossil forest localities in Rajmahal Hills, Bihar. 3. 260 million years old coal forming fossils in Orissa.